Welcome to the Fear Files channel. Today I will tell you a story that will give you goosebumps. This is the true story of one family who discovered something creepy right under their house. A young couple with two children moved into an old Victorian house on the outskirts of a small town. The house was built at the beginning of the 20th century and has changed many owners throughout its history. The price was incredibly low, which immediately caught the attention of the family. The real estate agent explained this by the fact that the house had been empty for a long time and required cosmetic repairs. The first weeks in the new house passed quietly. The family was engaged in arrangements, the children played in spacious rooms, and the parents planned repairs. But one evening, their youngest son, 7-year-old Tommy, ran into the kitchen with glowing eyes. He said that there was a strange door in the basement behind an old wardrobe. The father did not pay attention to this, deciding that the child was just playing researcher. But Tommy insisted. He pulled his father's hand, begging him to look at his find. In the end, the parents decided to go down to the basement with their son. The basement was typical of old houses, damp, with low ceilings and cobwebs in the corners. At the far wall, there was indeed a massive wooden cabinet covered with a layer of dust. When they pushed the wardrobe aside, there was a small door behind it, no higher than a meter. The door was made of darkened wood and had an old rusty handle. My father tried to open it, but the door would not budge. I had to go back upstairs for tools. With the help of a crowbar, the door was finally opened, and the family looked inside. Behind the door, there was a narrow tunnel that went deep under the house. The walls were lined with old bricks, crumbling in places. The air was stale and cold, smelling of dampness and something else, something unpleasant that they could not identify. My father took a flashlight and decided to explore the tunnel. The mother stayed with the children at the entrance. The tunnel led about 15 meters underground and ended in a small room. When my father entered there and illuminated the space with a flashlight, he froze. In the corner of the room was an old crib. Next to it lay a doll with faded hair and glassy eyes. Children's shoes were scattered on the floor, tiny, obviously for a child no older than 3 years old. But this was not the worst thing. On the wall opposite the crib hung a chain with a collar. The collar was too small for an adult. Next to her on the floor lay children's clothes, a dress faded with time, and a small sweater. Everything was covered with a thick layer of dust, as if no one had entered here for decades. Father felt a chill creep down his spine. He quickly left the room and returned to his family. His face was pale, his hands were trembling. He told his wife and children to go upstairs immediately and call the police. When the police arrived, they were as shocked by the find as the family itself. The search for information about the house and its previous owners began. It turned out that in the 60s of the 20th century, a family with an adopted daughter lived in this house. The girl's name was Emily. She was only 4 years old when she was taken from the orphanage. Neighbors remembered that for some time they saw the girl playing in the yard, but then she disappeared. The adoptive parents claimed that they gave her back to the orphanage as they could not cope with the upbringing. However, there was no record of Emily's return in the orphanage documents. The girl seemed to disappear into thin air. The case remained unsolved, although some neighbors suspected something was wrong. The adoptive parents soon moved out of the city, and the house was empty for a long time. After them, several more families lived in the house, but no one knew about the existence of the secret room. The police conducted a thorough investigation of the room. Scratches made by children's nails were found on the walls. In a corner, they found several milk teeth. The examination showed that they belonged to a child about 4 or 5 years old. The DNA from the teeth matched the samples that were obtained from the archive of the shelter where Emily once was. It became clear that the girl was kept in this underground room. It is not known how long she spent there, but the state of the matter and the examination data suggested that it lasted months and possibly years. The adoptive parents had already died by that time, so it was impossible to bring them to justice. The girl's body was never found. The family who discovered the room could no longer live in this house. Every night, they heard strange noises from the basement, a soft creaking as if someone was rocking a crib, and a baby crying. The mother swore that she had seen the shadow of a little girl in the hallway. Tommy began to say that a sad girl came to him and asked him to help her leave. A month later, the family moved out of the house. They sold it for almost nothing to the new owners, warning about the find in the basement. The new owners walled up the entrance to the tunnel with concrete, but this did not help. They also began to hear crying at night. The house was empty again and stands empty to this day. Locals avoid it, and children do not play next to it, even during the day. Some neighbors claim that sometimes in the evenings you can see the silhouette of a little girl in the windows of the house. She stands and looks out into the street, as if waiting for someone to take her away from here. It is said that Emily's spirit still cannot leave the place of her suffering, where she spent the last days of her short life. The city council tried several times to sell the house to new buyers, but each deal fell through. People came to view, but as soon as they went down to the basement and saw the concreted wall, they felt something was wrong. Many spoke of the suffocating atmosphere, of the feeling of being watched, of the sudden chill that chilled to the bone even on a hot summer day. One woman, a realtor by profession, said that when she entered the house, she felt someone pulling her by the sleeve of her dress. She turned around, but there was no one around. Then she heard a small child's voice whispering, "Help me get out." The woman ran out of the house and never returned there. A local newspaper wrote an article about the story, and the house became infamous throughout the region. Paranormal enthusiasts began to come there to conduct their research. One group of ghost hunters spent the night in a house with cameras and recording devices. On the tape, they recorded strange voices, children's crying, and incomprehensible shadows moving around the rooms. The creepiest was the video from the basement. On the recording, a child's voice is clearly heard, repeating, "It's dark, it's so dark, I want to go to mommy." Then the camera recorded how the concreted wall began to crack, as if something from inside was trying to get out. The members of the group left the house in panic and later admitted that it was the most frightening investigation of their careers. The priest of the local church, Father Michael, agreed to consecrate the house. He had come there with a Bible and holy water, intending to calm the troubled spirit. But as soon as he began to pray in the basement, he felt a strong blow in the chest, although there was no one nearby. He was thrown against the wall and lost consciousness. When Father Michael came to his senses, he said that he felt incredible pain and suffering coming from this place. After this incident, the priest refused to return to the house. He told the congregation that it was not just the spirit of the child that was present, but that the concentration of suffering was so strong that it created a kind of dark energy. He suggested that little Emily had experienced such anguish in the last days of her life that her soul could not find peace. Journalists began to investigate the history of the house. They managed to find a distant relative of Emily's adoptive parents, an old woman named Margaret. At first, she did not want to tell anything, but then she agreed to meet. What she told made even experienced reporters shudder. Margaret admitted that she had been to that house several times as a child. She remembered Emily, a quiet, frightened girl with big, sad eyes. The adoptive mother, Aunt Margaret, was a cruel woman with mental disorders. She blamed Emily for all her misfortunes, considered her a cursed child. The adoptive father was a weak-willed man who obeyed his wife in everything and did not interfere. Margaret remembered how one day she came to visit and did not see Emily. When she asked about the girl, the aunt said that she had sent her to the room for disobedience. Margaret was a teenager then and did not pay attention to this. But now, decades later, she realized that the room was the same underground prison. She admitted that all her life she was tormented by guilt for not helping the girl. According to Margaret, her aunt was obsessed with the idea of punishment. She believed that children had to suffer in order to become obedient. After Emily disappeared, the aunt became even more withdrawn and strange. Neighbors avoided communicating with this family. A few years later, the couple moved, and what happened to them next, Margaret did not know. The police tried to find Emily's burial place. They excavated the entire courtyard of the house, checked the surroundings, but did not find the body. There's a theory that the adoptive parents may have burned the body or dumped it in a river a few kilometers from the city. Without the body, it was impossible to establish exactly how the girl died, although all the evidence indicated that she died of starvation and abuse in that underground room. Several years have passed since the discovery of the secret room. The house still stands empty. The city authorities even discussed the possibility of its demolition, but each time something prevented the implementation of this plan. Either there was not enough budget, or the workers refused to take on the project, or bureaucratic delays arose. Local residents say that activity in the house increases on certain days. This is especially noticeable at the end of October, around the 27th. On this date, as it turned out from the archives of the orphanage, Emily had a birthday. On this night, the light in the windows of the house flashes on and off, although the electricity has long been cut off. Loud bangs are heard, as if someone is knocking on the wall with all their might, trying to get out. One teenager who entered the house that night on a bet ran out of there 5 minutes later, pale and shaking. He told his friends that he saw a little girl in a dirty dress in the basement. She sat in the corner and cried, covering her face with her hands. When the guy tried to come closer, the girl raised her head, and he saw her face. It was emaciated, with sunken cheeks and huge empty eyes. She stretched out her hands to him and whispered, "Let me out. Please let me out of here." The family who first discovered the room never recovered from the experience. They moved to another state, changed phone numbers, tried to forget about that house. But Tommy's youngest son continued to see the girl in his dreams. She came to him every night and cried. Tommy's parents took him to psychologists, to child therapists, but nothing helped. The boy lost weight, became withdrawn, refused to sleep in the dark. He drew the same picture, a little girl in the corner of a dark room, and next to it a chain and a crib. Psychologists talked about post-traumatic stress, prescribed sedatives, but the nightmares did not stop. One night, Tommy's mother woke up with a strange sensation. It was cold in the room, although the heating worked properly. She got out of bed and went to check on her son. The door to his room was ajar, and the dim light of the nightlight poured in. When she looked inside, her heart sank. Tommy was sitting on the bed, talking to someone invisible. He spoke quietly, soothingly. "I know you're in pain. I know you want to go home, but I can't help you. I'm just a child." The mother turned on the light and ran into the room. Tommy shuddered and looked at her with tear-stained eyes. He said that Emily comes to him every night and asks for help. She shows him terrible things, how she was locked in that room, how she screamed and cried, how she begged for mercy. The girl wants someone to find her body and bury her in a human way. Only then will she be able to rest. The family did not know what to do. The police have already conducted all possible searches and found nothing. But Tommy insisted. He said that Emily showed him the place. This is not a house or a yard. This is a forest about a kilometer from that cursed house. There is an old well, abandoned and overgrown with shrubs. It was there that her adoptive parents threw her body. Tommy's father was a skeptic, but he saw his son suffer. In desperation, he decided to check this information. He contacted the police and told them about his son's visions. The detective who was in charge of the case agreed to organize another search operation. He himself felt that this work needed to be completed. A group of several police officers, volunteers, and a family representative went to the forest. Tommy described the place as accurately as if he had been there himself. A large oak tree with a split trunk, a thicket of blackberries nearby, and an old stone well behind them. When they made their way through the dense bushes, they did indeed find a well that no one knew existed. It was hidden from view by vegetation and was not marked on any map. Rescuers went down into the well. At a depth of about 8 meters, among stones and mud, they found a small bundle wrapped in decayed cloth. The examination confirmed a terrible guess. These were the remains of a child of about 4 or 5 years old. The DNA matched Emily's samples from the shelter. The girl was found more than 50 years after her disappearance. The local community organized a funeral for Emily. Despite the fact that so many years have passed and no one who knew her survived, dozens of people came to the ceremony. They brought flowers, toys, drew postcards. A small white coffin was lowered into the ground in the city cemetery. The tombstone was engraved, "Emily, the beloved girl who was taken from life too early. Now you are free." On the night Emily was finally buried, Tommy slept peacefully for the first time in months. He told his parents in the morning that the girl came to him for the last time. She was smiling, dressed in a pure white dress, and her hair was braided into pigtails. She thanked him and said that she could leave now. She found her mother and is no longer alone. After the funeral, activity in the house decreased sharply. The few brave souls who went there said that the atmosphere had changed. The house was still gloomy and desolate, but that oppressive feeling of terror was gone. No one else heard children crying at night. There were no strange shadows in the windows. It was as if something heavy that had been hanging over this place for decades had finally dissolved. However, the story is not completely over. Several mediums and psychics who have visited the site have claimed to feel not one, but several children's presences there. They talked about other victims, about other children who could have suffered at the hands of that adoptive monster mother. But no evidence of this was found. The city archives showed that before Emily, there was another adopted girl in this family. Her name was Sarah. She was 6 years old. The documents indicate that 6 months after the adoption, the child died of pneumonia. But the doctor who signed the death certificate was known for his venality and willingness to sign any paper for money. Now the investigators wondered, did Sarah really die of the disease, or did she suffer the same fate as Emily? The search continued. The police organized excavations on the territory of the house and in the surrounding forests. They used special equipment to search for burials, geolocation radars, and service dogs. After a few weeks of painstaking work, they discovered another place in the forest, about 2 kilometers from the first well. There, under the roots of an old fallen tree, the remains of another child were found. The examination found that it was a girl of 6 or 7 years old, who died at about the same time as Emily, possibly a year or 2 earlier. from dental records, it was possible to establish that it was indeed Sarah. This means that the murderous family ruined the lives of at least 2 children. Investigators wondered if there were any more victims. They went through the archives of the orphanages, looked at the records of all the children taken by this couple. It turned out that before Sarah, they had a boy named David. He was 5 years old. He stayed in the family for only 3 months and then allegedly ran away. They searched for him, but never found him. The case was closed, deciding that the child died somewhere in the forest or drowned in the river. Now everyone understood that David did not run away. He was killed, as well as 2 girls. A new search began. Unfortunately, the area has changed a lot over the past decades. Forests were cut down, roads were built, and some areas were built up. It was becoming more and more difficult to find the burial place. But help came from an unexpected side. An elderly man named Robert, who lived next door to that family as a child, contacted the police. He said that as a child, he sometimes played in the forest and once saw the adoptive father of that family digging a hole near an old hunting hut. It was strange because the man was alone, looking nervous and constantly looking around. When he noticed little Robert, he got very angry and chased him away, threatening him with beatings. Robert remembered the incident all his life, but he never paid much attention to it until he heard the news of the remains. He led the police to the place in the forest where a hunting hut once stood. Only dilapidated stone walls, overgrown with moss and ivy, remained of it. The area has looked abandoned for many years. Specialists with GPR began to scan the soil around the ruins. On the 3rd day of the search, the equipment showed an anomaly in the ground about 10 meters from the hut. When they began to dig, they came across decayed tissue and small bones at a depth of about a meter. It was a child, a boy of about 5 or 6 years old. By all indications, it was David. 3 victims, 3 innocent children who were tortured to death by this monstrous couple. Investigators were shocked by the scale of the crime. They went through all the archives and found that the adoptive parents had tried to take in a few more children, but they had been rejected for various reasons. It is not known how many lives it saved. A funeral was also organized for David and Sarah. They were buried next to Emily in the same section of the cemetery. 3 small white tombstones stood in a row. People brought toys, flowers, left notes. Someone set up a small bench so that they could sit and remember the tragedy. After all 3 children were properly buried, paranormal activity in the house ceased completely. No one else heard the crying, saw the shadows, felt the presence. The house became just an old abandoned building, devoid of the terrible energy that permeated its walls. The city council decided to demolish the house. Too much pain was associated with this place. When the workers began dismantling, they found another creepy detail. Entries were hidden in the walls of the basement. The diary of his adoptive mother. She kept detailed records of her methods of education, described the punishments to which she subjected her children, their cries and pleas. Reading these notes was unbearable even for experienced investigators. The woman was a real psychopath, a sadist who took pleasure in the suffering of children. She described how she locked them in an underground room for days without food and water, how she beat them, how they gradually lost their strength and will to live. The latest entries were that the naughty children have finally calmed down and will no longer be a nuisance. The diary became an important piece of evidence that definitively proved what happened to the children. It was transferred to the police archives as material evidence. Psychologists studied the records, trying to understand what could turn a person into such a monster. It turned out that the adoptive mother herself had been abused in the family as a child. But this did not justify her crimes in any way. The house was demolished in a week. Workers said they were relieved when the last wall collapsed. An empty area was formed on the side of the house. The city authorities discussed for a long time what to do with this site. No one wanted to build a new building. In the end, it was decided to lay out a small memorial park there. 3 benches were installed in the park. Trees and flowers were planted. A monument was erected in the center, a bronze figure of an angel holding 3 children in his arms. Names were engraved on the pedestal: David, Sarah, Emily, and the inscription, "In memory of innocent souls. May their suffering never be forgotten, so that this will never happen again." The park became a place where people came to be silent, to think about the fragility of children's lives, about the importance of protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Parents brought their children there and told them a story so that they remembered how important it was to be vigilant and never remain indifferent if someone was suffering. Tommy recovered over time. The nightmares stopped completely after all 3 children were buried. He grew up to become a psychologist specializing in working with traumatized children. He said that his experience, terrible as it was, showed him his calling. He wanted to help children who had experienced horror find a path to healing. The family sometimes came to the memorial, brought flowers, spent time in silence. They felt that in a sense they had saved these 3 little souls by giving them what they had been deprived of in life: love, attention, and a dignified funeral. The history of this house has become infamous far beyond the city. Newspapers wrote about it, documentaries were made, books were written. It became a reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary doors in the most ordinary houses, and about how important it is to listen to children when they talk about their fears. Margaret, a distant relative of the murderers, was tormented by guilt until the end of her days. She founded a charitable foundation in memory of the dead children. The foundation helped orphanages, inspected the conditions of foster children, and trained social workers to recognize signs of abuse. She said that she could not turn back the clock, but she could try to prevent similar tragedies in the future. 20 years have passed since the discovery of the secret room. The park has grown, the trees have become tall, flowers cover the ground with bright colors every spring. Locals say that the atmosphere there is special, calm, peaceful. It is as if those 3 little souls have finally found peace and are blessing this place with their presence. Sometimes people notice strange but pleasant things in the park. Butterflies that land on a monument and do not fly away for a long time. Children's laughter, which can be heard in the wind, but it is joyful, not frightening. Flowers that grow in the most unexpected places. Those who believe in signs say that it is David, Sarah, and Emily who let it be known that they are fine. This story teaches us a lot. It reminds us of the importance of vigilance, of not turning a blind eye to the suffering of others. It shows how important the work of social services is, how necessary it is to control families who take foster children. And it proves that the truth always comes out, no matter what time has passed. For the family who discovered that room, life went on. They moved, built a new life, but never forgot what they had experienced. They said that in a sense they were grateful to fate for the fact that they were the ones who bought that house. Because if it weren't for them, if it wasn't for their son Tommy, the 3 little souls would have remained in the ground, nameless, forgotten, deprived of peace. The detectives who worked on this case also did not remain the same. The lead investigator, Detective James Harrison, admitted in an interview that this investigation was the most difficult in his 30-year career. He had seen many horrible things, but the thought of 3 children slowly dying in the dark, crying out for help, kept him awake at night. After the case was closed, he retired early, devoting himself to volunteer work with orphanages. The city archivist, an elderly woman named Helene, who helped in the search for documents, made a shocking discovery after the case was closed. While rummaging through old newspapers, she came across a note from 1958. It told about the mysterious disappearance of a 4-year-old boy named Peter in a neighboring county. The child disappeared during a walk, and he was never found. Helen noticed one detail. In the same newspaper, there was a small note that a family from their town had taken a boy from an orphanage in a neighboring county. The coincidence of dates was too accurate. She showed the find to the police, and a new round of investigation began. It turned out that the killer couple took children not only from the local orphanage, but also from neighboring cities, trying not to attract attention. The police returned to the excavations. Now, they have expanded the search area, examining the entire forest area within a radius of 5 kilometers from the former house. The search took months. Volunteers, investigators, dog handlers, everyone worked tirelessly. People wanted to find all the victims to give them the last chance for a dignified funeral. In the end, about 4 kilometers from the house, in a ravine overgrown with thorns, another burial was found. It was really St. Petersburg, a little boy who never saw his 5th birthday. According to the examination, he died of exhaustion and dehydration, like the rest of the children. 4 innocent children died at the hands of these monsters. Investigators checked all the archives, all records of adopted children for 30 years that this couple was active. Fortunately, no other victims were found. But there was always a question: what if somewhere in the forest there are still the remains of the 5th or 6th child, about which there is simply no records preserved? Peter was buried next to 3 other children. Now, there were 4 small white tombstones in the cemetery. The monument in the park was redone, adding a 4th child in the arms of an angel. The story became more and more tragic with each new find. Reporters found and interviewed several people who had been in the same shelter as the victims as children. One woman, Mary, told a heartbreaking story. She remembered Emily, a quiet girl who always kept to herself. When the couple came to pick up the baby, Emily burst into tears and didn't want to go with them. But the shelter staff insisted. They said she was lucky to have a family. Mary remembered Emily turning in the doorway and looking at her with eyes full of tears. This was the last time she was seen alive. All her life, Mary was tormented by the question, why her? Why didn't Emily get a good family? Which later took Mary herself. Survivor's guilt. This feeling haunted her for decades. Psychologists began to study the phenomenon of this case. How could 2 adults systematically kill children over the years without anyone noticing? It turned out that the neighbors really suspected something. Some heard children crying at night, saw the strange behavior of adoptive parents. But in those days, people were not used to interfering in other people's family affairs. One elderly neighbor, Mrs. Graham, admitted that one night she heard screams from the basement of that house. It was winter on one of the frosty January days. She woke up from a child's cry. "Help! It's cold! Please!" The screams continued for about half an hour, then subsided. Mrs. Graham wanted to call the police, but her husband dissuaded her, saying that she should not meddle in other people's business. She regretted this decision all her life. Maybe if she had called then, at least one of the children would have been saved. This story has become an important lesson for the local community. Silence kills. After this incident, the city organized a program to train citizens to recognize the signs of child abuse. Schools began to provide special lessons for children, explaining to them that no one has the right to hurt them and that they can always ask for help. A hotline was created where you could anonymously report suspected child abuse. Social services have strengthened control over foster families. Over time, history has become overgrown with urban legends. Some teenagers said they saw the ghosts of 4 children playing in the park at sunset. They ran, laughed, caught up with each other. They did everything that they were deprived of in life. Skeptics said it was just a play of light and shadows, but those who saw it with their own eyes swore they were real children. One young mother told an amazing story. She came to the park with her 3-year-old daughter. The girl ran to play and suddenly stopped, looking into the void. The mother asked what had happened, and the daughter answered, "Mom, why are those children so sad?" When the mother asked what kind of children she saw, the girl pointed to the monument and said, "There are those 4. They are standing next to the uncle with wings. They want to play, but they are afraid." His mother grew cold. She sat down next to her daughter and said, "Tell them they can play. They no longer need to be afraid. They're safe." The girl nodded and seemed to whisper something into the void. Then she smiled and said, "They say thank you." Since then, this mother regularly came to the park with her daughter, brought toys, and left them at the monument. The local church held a memorial service every year on the day when the first room was found. People came, lit candles, prayed for the souls of the dead children. The priest preached sermons about the protection of the innocent, about the fact that every child is a gift that must be protected. 30 years have passed since the discovery of the Chamber of Secrets. Tommy, who had first found the door, was now the father of 3 children himself. He wrote a book about his experience, about how facing this story changed his life. The book became a bestseller, and he donated all the proceeds to child protection programs. In the book, he described not only the horror of those events, but also how important it is to remember the victims. He wrote about each of the 4 children, their short lives, their hopes, their sufferings. He wanted them not to be just statistics, nameless victims, but to remain in people's memories as real children with real dreams. Tommy often spoke to social workers and foster parents. He told his story, urged to be vigilant, taught to recognize the signs of abuse. His work saved more than one child's life. Many said that his lectures changed their approach to work, made them more attentive and responsible. The park, laid out on the site of the murderous house, has become a symbol of hope. Yes, a tragedy occurred there, but now is a place of life, beauty, and memory. Children played on the swings installed there later. Parents sat on the benches, watching them. And everyone remembered that once upon a time, for children here did not get a chance for such a simple, ordinary joy. The city changed after this story. People have become closer to each other, more attentive. The neighbors no longer turned a blind eye to the strange behavior of other families. Teachers were trained to notice signs of violence in their students. Doctors asked more questions when they saw unexplained injuries in children. Statistics showed results. For 30 years after the disclosure of the case, there was not a single case of the death of a child at the hands of adoptive parents in the city. There have been several cases where children have been removed from dysfunctional families, but always on time, before the irreparable happens. The city learned from its terrible mistakes. The story of David, Sarah, Emily, and Peter has become an eternal reminder of the price of silence and the power of human compassion. Their short lives, full of suffering, were not in vain. They changed the whole community, taught people not to remain indifferent. Every year, on the anniversary of the discovery of the secret room, hundreds of people gather in the park. They bring white balloons on which they write messages to children and release them into the sky. This is a touching sight. Hundreds of white balls rising into the sky, like the souls of children who have finally found freedom. The family who bought the cursed house and unwittingly revealed this terrible secret never regretted their decision to move in. Yes, it brought them pain and suffering, but they saved the memory of 4 children. They gave them what they were deprived of: a name, a history, a dignified resting place. The monument in the park has become a place of pilgrimage for people from all over the country. Adoptive parents came there to remind themselves of their responsibility. Social workers brought flowers, promising to always be on guard of children's well-being. Ordinary people came just to stand in silence, to hug their children tighter. There are always fresh flowers on the tombstones of 4 children. The toys that people leave there are regularly donated to orphanages so that other children can play with them. That's what David, Sarah, Emily, and Peter would want other kids to be happy. Years later, many said that they felt not grief in that park, but peace. It was as if the 4 children finally stopped suffering and found the home they never managed to find in life. They're no longer locked in the dark. They are free. They are rememberable. They are loved. And this, perhaps, is the main lesson of this terrible story. Even the darkest secret someday comes to light. Even forgotten souls can find peace. And each of us has a responsibility to ensure that such tragedies never happen again. It was a story from the archives of the Fear Files, a story about a secret hidden underground, about 4 little souls who left this world too soon, and about how sometimes the most terrible monsters live not in dark corners, but in ordinary houses behind closed doors. Remember this, be vigilant, and never remain indifferent to someone else's pain. Thank you for being with us. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. See you next time on the Fear Files.